Well, that was quite surprising. Hello everyone, yes, welcome back to my channel, TGR, if you will. And at first, I was a little bit apprehensive about watching Smile 2, considering Smile 1. Oh, Jay, you didn't like Smile 1? No, and I'm gonna explain why. It's the ring. You get a curse by watching something, you pass on the curse by doing something, and if you don't, you die in 7 days. It's the ring. How this became a full feature-length movie? I have no idea, considering how derivative the original idea was, if you can even use the word original in this context. So, unoriginal idea, I guess. Now, the original inspiration for Smile 1 was actually taken from a short back in 2020, I believe, and the director for that short is the same director as this movie, both 1 and 2. So, that's quite interesting. But to make it brief, Smile 1 is tropey AF. F standing for frick. Let's just lightly touch on some of the tropes present in the first movie, shall we? Because this is important, because I will be drawing comparisons between the first one and the sequel, as you would expect. Tropey shot of a car driving through a foresty road. Check. Ooh, the researching scene where she's looking online for other instances of this haunting. Check. Playing back audio from an interview or something where you can hear the demon talk or something like that. Check. She visits the relative of a previous victim and their room is filled with drawings and scribblings and etchings of the demon. Check. Cheesy CCTV footage of the demon doing something quote-unquote scary. Check. Trying desperately in vain to convince any of the other characters that what's happening is real. To no avail. Check. 7 days to die. Check. There is only a single survivor of the curse before her, and he ends up screaming out of pure trauma. Check. Look, I've been watching horror movies for the last 24 years, okay? You've seen Smile 1 100 times before Smile came out. The fact that this movie even got a sequel is honestly unbelievable to me. But then again, you do need to recognize that Smile 1 is something I have coined as normie horror. See, normies don't actually like good horror. That's why all the good horror never makes it to cinema and is some sort of cult classic on the fringes of the culture, right? Normie horror is kind of like the mainstream, easy to digest, not actually that scary horror that floats to the top that normies can be like, this is amazing, but they only think it's amazing because as a horror, it's not actually that scary and they're able to enjoy some sort of pseudo horror movie. That's what a normie horror is. Another very recognizable trait of a normie horror movie are constant, unending jump scares. And we're gonna get to more of that later on, but I did not like Smile 1, but I didn't hate it, because quite frankly, Smile 1 is the most unbelievably average movie I've ever seen. There's nothing really good or that bad you could say about it. Except for maybe the fact that in the first movie, there was absolutely no chemistry between any characters at any point. I don't even know why they were in there, to be perfectly honest. You expect me to believe that these two people are due to be wed? Not buying it. So when I say I was going to watch Smile 2 with the lowest of expectations, you can believe me. If you want a completely fresh, untouched experience of the movie, don't watch a review of it before you've seen the movie, okay? Or if you have no intention of watching it, welcome, you're in the right place. I'm gonna fill you in on whether or not you should watch it at some point whenever it comes out on streaming services. I'm not going to spoil any major plot points, okay? I am simply going to talk about the plot, the characters, and some of the aspects of the movie that I did and did not like. Now, one of my favorite things about this movie, one of the things that I honestly immediately commended this movie for, were two things, straight off the bat. The opening scene is strong as hell. The opening scene is great. I am a massive, let's just say, this cinematography concept wouldn't have to try too hard to get me out of my clothes. I'm a massive fan of long, uncut shots. That still sounds a little bit adult themed. Long uncut scenes. Oh yeah. The opening scene that wraps up one of the characters from the previous movie is one shot. It's an 8-minute shot, presumably uncut. I watched the whole thing. There were probably some, stitched together sort of camera swing sections, but the audience is meant to believe it's a single shot. I am a massive cinematography nerd, and I loved this. It was also one of my favorite aspects of Haunting of Hill House, that whole funeral wake scene where most of it, almost the entire episode, is just one shot. I thought that was really cool. That's a lot of acting non-stop that you have to do. Anyway, this scene at the beginning wraps up the only loose end that was from the first movie. And everything from this scene onwards is completely fresh and new and does not reference the original movie ever at any point, which I love. I love that. Smile 2 really does try to be its own thing. It tries to separate itself from the original story that was present in the first movie because, quite frankly, I don't think the story in the first one was that good. And it proves that the second one wasn't trying to rely on its success from the first movie to carry this one by making it so different. So huge commendations for that. So here's where I'm going to talk about the plot of the movie, or the initial setup, the event on which the entire movie continues. So if you don't want to hear this, just skip to wherever this is taking you, like I did in the last one. The movie follows a pop star. I know, right? That's amazing. And quite quickly, they establish her backstory and why she is the way that she is and why she goes to the place that she goes, which I thought was great. It's fast-paced storytelling to make sure that the rest of the movie has time to expand, rather than spending so much time dragging its feet with character building before any real events happen. Get to the point. So our main character is a female pop star called Sky Riley. I know. Did they just go with the first name they thought of? Now, there are several references to her surviving an extremely traumatic event. This is quite good. It sets that up immediately. By appearing on a talk show talking about all of the events that have transpired before the movie begins. Basically giving us a not so clunky expositional scene about our heroine, because it's contextual. It's a far cry away from a character bringing a phone to their ear and being like, oh, hello, sis. No, our two brothers are here with us now, who are both 3 years older than I am. That kind of crap. No, it contextualizes her backstory in quite a nice, neat, and expected way, naturally with a pop star being on a talk show. Now, Sky Riley does have some lingering pain from the car accident that she had only recently recovered from, and she decides to go to a dealer to get some pain relief medication. And while there, the dealer starts acting weirder than usual. Even though the guy is several lines deep, he's acting weird even for that. So then you can imagine what happens next. And that sets up our heroine with the stigmata. Like watching the cursed videotape from The Ring, she is now carrying the curse that will last for the next 7 days, ramping up in horrific mental torture. And the movie begins. So let's talk about the rest of the movie as vaguely as possible, just in case you want to go and see it for yourself, which at this point, I'm gonna say, I recommend you do, for one reason only. And I'm gonna explain that at the end. First of all, the upside down shots, whatever symbolism they represent, is present in this movie as it was in the first movie, which is nice, though not as frequent as they were in the original movie. Sometimes you forget that the cinematographer likes to shoot things upside down. Now, the soundtrack and sound design, same dude as the first movie, and it's equally as good. It's quite abstract. It's not as generic as other horror soundtracks are. Some time and effort was actually put into making this soundtrack and the sound design feel a little more unique to this particular movie. And honestly, I think that's great, considering that the sound designer, or at least the guy that did the score for this movie, is relatively unsung. One of his most notable soundtracks, for me anyway, was the Jimmy Savile documentary we had over here on Netflix. Yeah, the guy did a soundtrack for a documentary about a British PDF file. So the fact that this guy was able to tackle a second feature-length film with equal tact as he did the first is honestly commendable. Very good. Congratulations. And since we're on the subject of congratulating fledgling creators on being on a feature-length film that's in cinemas, Parker Finn, the director, this is his second ever movie. Yeah, the first one being Smile 1. And before that was Laura Hasn't Slept, which is the predecessor to these two movies. It was the short that he created. I say created. He just downloaded the script for The Ring and changed the names around. I'm having trouble overlooking this aspect, okay? I'm a big fan of the original Ring. I've been watching it since it came out, and I've seen all of the rip-offs and clones and renditions of that, like Countdown, for example. There are so many movies like The Ring. It's amazing to me that we are still getting movies that are derivative of The Ring, like 20 years later. Maybe the guy thought it's been so long that people won't remember the original Ring. Apparently they don't, so good on him. The guy's barely older than me, so. No, you're right, I'm sorry. Okay, in the first movie, there's no kid. Now, like the first movie, our main character, Sky Riley, is surrounded by impersonal, cold characters, where there is almost absolutely no personal connection between her or anybody else, which is one of the things I did not like about the original movie. None of those relationships in the first movie were believable. None of them. Almost as if he came up with the idea for the main character's main struggle, and someone was just like, what about the other characters? And he was like, who? Oh, right. Really put me on the spot here. And the camera guy's just like, ready to film whenever. What I mean to say is that it's filming day, and he hasn't come up with any extra characters, so he had to come up with them on the spot. That's how it feels in the first movie. But in this movie, in Smile 2, it actually works, because as you would imagine, a pop star is probably surrounded by people who aren't, let's just say, actually emotionally invested in who you are, and instead have a professional relationship to you. You being a pop, you are Sky Riley. No one likes you. Which is actually the premise of this movie. You see, our main heroine battles with this internal dialogue that she's broken and no one actually likes her, which, as you can imagine, is probably a field day for the demon that she's just snagged. So the familiar reoccurring lack of chemistry between the main character and any of the characters does make a return, but it's far better contextualized in this movie. It's actually a believable aspect. It's a feature, not a bug. There is a very clear, frequent, and obvious Voss water sponsorship with this movie, with product placements all the time and in your face. Can be a little bit jarring, to be perfectly frank. This is nearly verbatim from the movie. Yeah, just, my therapist was just like, if I ever feel like using again, I should just take a really big swig of Voss water. Minus the Voss water part and looking at the camera. Now, if you are a big fan of the original Smile movie, then number one, you've probably already disliked the video. And number two, you might find the process of the haunting and the process of the demon taking over the host a little bit predictable. You might find yourself a little bit apprehensive about pretty much anything that happens. And since this main character is completely fresh and new to the concept of this demon, you might find yourself a little bit frustrated since none of the knowledge has been carried over from the original movie. This is a fresh, brand new victim who has no idea. But what I will say is if you are a fan of the first movie, you will find that the familiar progress of the demon infecting the host has been ramped up. There has been more budget, more writing, more time, more pizzazz thrown into the process of the demon messing with the host, with the victim. And I've gotta say, they ramp it up really well, okay? As someone who's seen Smile 1 twice, once when it came out, and again right before I went to the cinema to go watch this movie, so I am well-versed with the original story and also the story that's in this one, since I watched this yesterday. There are far more layers to the level of messing with the victim that the demon does that are not present in the first one. In fact, the level of distorted reality that Sky Riley has to decipher, has to deal with, makes the first one feel superficial. It makes the first one skin deep, which again is just a synonym, I guess, for superficial. I do that a lot. I'm a walking thesaurus. So even though I was extremely familiar myself with the MO of this demon, I was still pleasantly surprised by how far they actually went. For example, in the first movie, it's mainly individuals who show up and smile at the main character, which can get a little bit tiresome. But in this one, they ramp it up a little bit. There's a group smiling scene, and you're probably like, what, is this like a bunch of people in a public setting smiling at the main character? No! No, they actually do it in quite a unique way, utilizing aspects of a pop star's lifestyle, which is great. It has a sense of choreography to it, which is really cool. It's a group of actors who are moving around the apartment as if they are a singular creature. And it's honestly an Aphex Twin music video. I don't think Americans are gonna get that. I think it's a great way to escalate a pre-existing concept that the first movie established, was by doing that. Like taking a joke and amplifying it, taking a concept and amplifying it. And boy, does this movie amplify things. I will get to that, okay? Because you're gonna wanna know the main reason why you're gonna wanna go see this movie, okay? Now again, this is, I would say, a normie horror movie. It is rife with jump scares all over the place, and they're super annoying. If you're a massive, handsome horror fan like myself, then you like your horror a little more subtextual, a little more ambient, a little more abstract, more time and effort put into creating a sense of dread that follows the viewer outside of the cinema. But if you're a massive horror fan, you know what I'm talking about. Essentially, Smile 2 is the genre equivalent of going to a haunted house ride and a guy dressed in a cheap clown outfit jumps out from behind a wall and you go, ah, and then you're fine again immediately like that. Look, I don't know why they do it, but normies love it. It's their favorite kind of horror because it's short bursts. They don't have to commit to being scared the entire time, which I do. So for massive horror fans, there is the running storyline of what's real, what's actually happening. Is that person actually there? Did she actually just do that, or is that all a figment of her now distorted imagination? And for the casual normie horror fans, the jump scares will be there to make sure that you tell your friends that it's great, because you're unable to perceive any other form of horror other than that. Now, unlike the first movie, where the main character almost immediately has leave from work to have plenty of time to experience her new hobby of being haunted by a demon. In this movie, Sky Riley has a very packed schedule, as you'd imagine a pop star would, and it's made increasingly obvious through the dialogue that she cannot cancel or quit any of her prior commitments. For example, a tour that keeps being brought up. She cannot cancel the tour, which means she still needs to go to photo shoots and meet and greets and do choreography training and do, stage practice and rehearsals and all these other things that a pop star is expected to do, like talk shows and giving speeches at ceremonies, and she has to continue to do all these things. She cannot take time off of doing this. While she's being haunted, she can't. She has to go to work. She has to do all these things. She has to act normal around all of these deeply impersonal yet imposing people who need a lot of her. And that creates some very fun, tense, and cringe-worthy moments that you will find yourself trying to look away from. Fan meet and greets. The demon's there. Giving a speech at a charity event. The demon's there. Taking promotional shots for the upcoming tour. The demon, believe it or not, is actually there. So you get to see Sky Riley, the main character, try to operate her normal day-to-day life. For her, it's normal for her, it's not normal for us. While also battling the demon at the same time. Completely alone. Completely alone. There is no one to help her. She is alone. And this adds to the sense of isolation, which totally works with this context. And on top of that, her mother is her manager. And unfortunately, manager mom is putting a lot of extra stress and tension on the main character, adding to the trauma, adding to the stress. Now, there is a single aspect of this movie that I feel was maybe underutilized, or maybe it was used just enough for it to be effective. Now, one of my favorite horror movies of all time is The Shining. I have it on Blu-ray. It's like a comfort horror. I don't know how to explain it, but you know you're a horror fan when you have comfort horror movies. And The Shining is amazing due to, in no small part, Jack Nicholson's performance. Now, Jack Nicholson has a son called Ray Nicholson. So as you can imagine, to exploit her trauma, Ray Nicholson is manifested in front of her by the demon. Now, I'm not going to describe the scene too much because honestly, it's quite a great scene. But what I will talk about is the fact that Ray Nicholson was using this face. And even if you didn't know that Ray Nicholson was Jack Nicholson's son, you would now, because it is a dead ringer for Pappy. And I gotta say, even though his appearance in the movie is brief, his performance and his screen presence are not to be ignored. I thought they were great. There are only, I believe, 2 scenes that he actually appears on screen with the main character, and both times are notable. And I would be shocked if he doesn't have a future in horror movies by himself where he plays the lead. I would love to see a remake of The Shining where he plays Jack Nicholson's character. Since we live in the day and age of remakes, because nothing original sells anymore, hence the first movie. I keep ripping on it, dude. It's so easy. Now, as I said, you will enjoy the level of torture that the demon puts the main character through. if you have seen the first movie or you're really familiar with it, you will still be surprised by how far it takes the original concept of distorting reality and messing with, the social circle of the main character to traumatize them further, to get them into a weakened state where it can then, take over the host within a week. And if you haven't seen the first movie, then this is going to ruin your ability to watch the first one. So I would watch the first one so you can see how much better this one is. And I can honestly say, I cannot fault Naomi Scott's acting. It is brilliant. And the fact that they maintain that she's a pop star. They don't immediately dispel who she is as a character in order to suffer at the hands of this demon like they did in the first movie. I feel like in the first movie, the main character loses all sense of identity and simply just becomes a victim of the demon. Whereas in this one, she does cling on to who she is as a pop star, mainly because she has to, but it's also in her personality to dance and sing songs. Not that this is a musical, by any means it's not, but there are a few moments, even in her quiet time between being tormented by a demon and, seeing her fans or hanging out with her publicist, that she still maintains this level of being a pop star. Even in a private time, she still plays the piano. It's not frequent, but it's there enough to remind the audience that she is a pop star and she is being haunted. She maintains her identity, which is super important. Now, there is a scene that I'm not a big fan of, and honestly, to me, I don't think it's too important to talk about in terms of being a potential spoiler. I'm not going to name the character, I'm not going to name the context, but there is a scene in the movie where, if this is your first time watching anything in the Smile universe, or even just for the benefit of the main character, since no one ever explains to her what is going on because nobody knows, there is a scene where a guy shows up and he pretty much explains in concise to a fault dialogue exactly what's happening to Sky Riley so that she knows what's happening to her, right? It's not just a mystery the entire time. By the end of the movie, you will question why this scene even happened to begin with, other than the director trying to explain the premise of his movie to the audience. And I feel like that's my least favorite part of the movie. I thought that didn't need to happen. I think it would have been fun if the main character had just experienced this without knowing what the hell was going on. Since this exposition that Sky Riley gets from this character seems to have no effect at all over changing her behavior, it doesn't change anything. She gets this information about what exactly is happening to her, and almost nothing changes. I feel like it didn't need to be there. It was super clunky, and based on the end of the movie, it makes even less sense. So now let's talk about the end of the movie. Now, as promised, no spoilers, but if nothing I have said has convinced you to go see this movie yet, then go and see it purely for the end of this movie, okay? The end of this movie is actually insane. I think maybe for 3 reasons. I'm thinking of 2 right now, but I'm formulating a third, so let's see. Reason the first, the ending is insane because when I tell you you don't see it coming, you don't. Look, there might be some people in the comments being like, I saw it coming, but words are cheap. You could just say that, and there's no way for anyone to test if what you just said is the truth. And if by some work of genius, you did predict the ending, what's to say that what is happening was even actually happening? I did think of 3, and number 3. I was watching this ending with my mouth open and laughing because I could not believe what I was seeing, okay? The rest of the movie, I was like this. Oh, well, that's pretty cool. And then at the end of the movie, I was like this. Just like that. The end of the movie is so much better than the rest of the movie. Even though the rest of the movie's good, I quite enjoyed it. It's relatively unique as far as normie horrors go. I enjoyed the premise. Sky Riley was a relatable character, and I thought that all of the additional characters made sense, and it was consistent with the first, while also adding its own aspect by ramping up what was present in the first movie. But this ending, I did not like the ending for the first movie, okay? It was underwhelming, to say the least, okay? And it leaves a loose end that is promptly tied up at the beginning of Smile 2. Now, the ending of Smile 2, I would say, is a reason to go watch the movie, because given the context of the entire situation, of the entire event that is Sky Riley's haunting, it really does ramp it up at the end. So go watch it, if only for that ending, because it's so enjoyable. I was smiling. I was smiling and agape. I was agape, and it really does set Smile 3 up for being probably one of the greatest horror sequels of all time, if they know how to pull it off. So enjoy. Anyway, people, that was my review of Smile 2, and I'm rhyming once again. I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone who has actually subscribed from my first ever video on this channel. And thank you for all the wonderful, nice comments. I've been reading all of them, as you have seen, and I've replied to pretty much all of them too. And you can expect a new review every Monday, and my next video will be a horror game review. So if any of you are gamers out there, you might enjoy that. So I will see you next Monday. Goodbye, everybody.